Freddie Gray suffered a spinal injury in police custody last month. The state attorney for Baltimore, Marilyn Mosby, decided to charge the officers herself rather than seek an indictment from a jury.
Thank you, Diana. It's 28 minutes to 8 now. Election time means thinking about what kind of country we are. Leaders try, or at least they should be trying, to define a national mood and perhaps tell a story that links the future to the past. That's especially true in Scotland this time round, in the crucible of this election, where a nationalist party is putting its stamp on a general election in a way that we haven't seen in these islands in our lifetimes. And nationalism means a national story. What are Scots being invited to think about themselves, and what do they really believe? Leave aside the question of what people outside Scotland think of them. Well, the writer Val McDairmid joins us from Glasgow now, and with me here in Edinburgh is the critic and writer Stuart Kelly. Stuart, let me start with you. You wrote a book in which you said that Sir Walter Scott, the 19th century novelist, one has to add that these days, I think, anyway, defined Scotland in a way and made it think about itself. A lot of it, of course, was faked up and romantic, but what is the legacy that Scots have had to deal with in the last nearly 200 years of Scots' vision of what it is?
Well, I think Scots' vision defined a Scotland which was picturesque, romantic. I mean, given that only a generation beforehand, Boswell and Johnson thought the place was absolutely wretched and, devoid of any beauty whatsoever. He also guaranteed, in a way, that there was a sense of the Scots having an equality. If you compare Scott to Dickens, it's very noticeable that Scott never patronises, he never mocks the lower classes. The only class that he ever mocks is his own class, the Edinburgh bourgeoisie. So that idea of the Scots, the all Jock Tamson's bairns, is quite ingrained in Scott's work.
And what do you think, Val McDairmid, has happened in the last generation? Because manifestly something has happened culturally. What is it?
I think one of the things that happened is that in the lead up to the devolution debates in the 1970s, we started asking ourselves, what kind of people are we? What kind of country do we want to have? And that led to a flowering of Scottish literature. So you have the country being examined in a way, culturally, in a way that people could access very readily, because a lot of it came through popular literature. Writers such as Irvine Welsh, Ian Rankin, Denise Mina, describing us to ourselves.
Some of it pretty dark.
Some of it very dark indeed. And in a way that's, I suppose, a reaction to the sort of tartan and shortbread that was what came out of Scott, although it wasn't what Scott directly wrote.
Well, that's right. Tartan and shortbread, which makes people's teeth grind. Stuart Kelly, where are we on the shortbread circuit at the moment?
Well, I think that's more of a description of the Kale Yard of the kind of late 19th century, which in a way was Scotland defining itself within the Union. I mean, the Act of Union in some ways is incredibly misinterpreted. It was a guarantee that Scotland was different. It was different in terms of religion, it was different in terms of law, and consequently, with religion and law, education. So the idea that Scotland was an equal partner with differences has been eradicated. It's why Scott, towards the end of his life, so furiously says, the English are breaking our union. And I think we're seeing something very similar to that now.
Well, the interesting thing about the point you began with, Val McDairmid, about what happened in the devolution argument, is that people are aware, whether they're in Scotland or not, that something remarkable happened in the referendum, that there was a poll across the country which touched 85% in some places. There were figures of 91, 92% turnout, quite extraordinary. And the reason was, I think there's a general agreement about this, that there was actually a decision to be made that couldn't be avoided. And whether you were on one side or the other, and we know that the no side won by about 10%, it was something that had to be faced and was consequently faced with enthusiasm.
It was extraordinary to see the engagement of people. You're hearing people saying things like, I've been sitting on my settee for the last 30 years and now I'm off my settee, I'm not going back to it. and I think there was a genuine level of engagement with politics that I've never seen in my lifetime. I found it very exciting, and I think a lot of people have suddenly woken up to the fact that they can do something to change their democratic status, if you like.
And without getting into the party battle, which we'll come to later in the programme, Stuart, but that enthusiasm and the kind of tide seems to have translated into something in this campaign, which I think a lot of people, including people in the SNP who are surging in the polls, of course, hadn't really expected and been quite surprised by.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think, in a way, one of the unintended consequences of asking the question in the referendum was that the question presupposed a difference. Whether you wanted to maintain the Union or whether you wanted to be independent. It was a question for Scots and Scots only. So that sense of there being a different realpolitik in Scotland persisted despite the result, and I think that's what we're seeing now.
But I think
sorry, yeah, carry on, Val.
I also think the interesting thing, Stuart, is it wasn't just about people who were born in Scotland and identified themselves as Scots. It was a civic nationalism. It was people who live here, people who contribute to this society, not just having ethnic, if you like, Scotsness. We didn't let people vote from Australia or from America who'd left the country, who don't contribute to our civic life. It was about the civic life of Scotland.
I think that's absolutely right. And there is a sense in which that Scottish identity, which maintained itself throughout the Union. I mean, let's not forget there were plenty of independent countries beforehand, like Piedmont, but nobody's now talking about Piedmontese nationalism or Schleswig-Holstein nationalism, and that's because it is a civic thing rather than a blood thing.
And finally, Val McDairmid, the interesting thing is that elections should be an argument about what kind of country we are, whether we're talking about the UK or England or Scotland. And what happened in the referendum was that you couldn't avoid the question, although of course it produced deep and sometimes very painful disagreements between people. You couldn't avoid the urgency of the question. And once you've asked it, the question just doesn't go away.
I think so. I think we're still, I mean, stands Scotland where it did? Well, no, actually.
Val McDairmid in Glasgow, Stuart Kelly here in Edinburgh. Thank you both very much as ever.
The time, 20